And no doctrine of Christianity is contingent upon, or hinges upon, or is dependent upon these textual uncertainties. In fact,
today, one of my favorite phrases in the Bible begins right here in verse 9, but we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels, for the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, that he, by the grace of God, might taste death for everyone.
You have often said that there are verses where variants change the meaning of an entire book. Could you give us some examples?
A verse of changing an entire book. Yeah, sure. I think that, I actually do think that if Hebrews 2:9 said that Jesus died apart from God, that there is no place in Hebrews then where Jesus is said to have died by the grace of God. And that the meaning now, I think, for Hebrews means that Jesus died like a full flesh and blood human being without any divine comfort or support. If the reading is not chorus theou, but charis theou, that he died by the grace of charity theou, he died by the grace of God, then in fact you do have the teaching that Jesus' death was an act of divine grace in Hebrews, which otherwise you don't have.
And yet, when you argued that point in the Orthodox corruption of Scripture, did you not argue that chorus theou is consistent with the theology of Hebrews?
Yeah, the variant changes it.
How can you argue that it's consistent with the theology of Hebrews if
I'm
the
not saying
variant
chorus.
changes it?
I'm saying that charis, depending on which variant you have, the meaning of the book changes.
So nowhere else in the book do you have this idea of Jesus' death that would be presented in Hebrews 2:9. Based upon reading 1/10th century manuscript and Origen's manuscripts, at least some of Origen's manuscripts. You said the majority, but I don't know where Origen actually said that.
I'm sorry, I don't understand your question.
So your assertion then is that the book of Hebrews would not present that view of the atonement of Jesus unless you have that reading in Hebrews 2:9. Elsewhere, it just doesn't.
Nowhere else does Hebrews say that Jesus died by the grace of God. This is the one place.
I understand that, but you believe that the original is chorus because that is consistent with the writing of Hebrews, with the theology of Hebrews.
And the variant changes that.
Away from it. Okay, I understand what you're saying.
Because he was crowned with glory and honor, that he, by the grace of God, should taste death for every man. Now we need to pause here for a moment, because this is the first time the author of Hebrews mentions that word grace. And we understand that to Paul was given the dispensation of the grace of God. And Paul is the only place in the Scripture where you find someone preaching the gospel of the grace of God, that phrase Paul uses in Acts 20. Okay? We know that we're saved by grace through faith, Ephesians 2:8-9. And we know that Paul, more than any other writer of the Scripture, uses that word grace by a factor of 10. You know, he uses that word grace to describe. So grace is the content of Paul's epistles. And we've already discussed how some people think that Paul wrote Hebrews, and one of the reasons is this verse right here where he talks about the grace of God. All right.
That's what the Muslims are trying to tell you. There's something wrong.
And no doctrine of Christianity is contingent upon, or hinges upon, or is dependent upon these textual uncertainties.
Hebrews 2:9 said that Jesus died apart from God, that there is no place in Hebrews then where Jesus is said to have died by the grace of God.
To the most reasonable explanation given by the Muslim, the Christian nods his head.
قل يا أهل الكتاب لا تغلوا في دينكم غير الحق ولا تتبعوا أهواء قوم قد ضلوا من قبل وأضلوا كثيرا وضلوا